On this day, Monday, October 14th, we are here to remember Will Dissly, taken from fantasy owners far too soon. Will Dissly was not a man that we expected, but he became the man that we needed. He was there to help us through the worst of times, becoming a consistent pillar in our life, even for a short amount of time. Will Dissly, this episode is for you. Hey, what's going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle coming back to you from the Draft.com studios with another episode of the Fantasy Headliners, your waiver wire episode for Week 7. A little bit of a somber atmosphere to start the episode, but you know what? Will would not want us to celebrate his time helping fantasy owners this season in this fashion. So we're going to bump it up a notch. We're going to run through several names that you should be taking a look at prior to waivers running before Week 7 of the NFL season. We have some major teams on a bye this week, depending on what position that you're looking at, so you probably will need to hit the waiver wire this week. Now, the one thing that I do want to mention, no quarterbacks in this week's episode, because the quarterbacks that are going to be on byes next week largely are not being used by fantasy owners. So if you have specific questions about quarterbacks, if you really are missing somebody, let me know. We can talk about it a little bit in the comments. And as always, keep an eye on my quarterback start and sit episode, and of course the rankings episode as well. And I'll throw out some names there. But because there's not a whole lot of quarterbacks that we're going to be missing in Week 7, went ahead and left them out of this episode. But we do have running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends that we need to get ready to discuss. So let's jump into it. Who should you be taking a look at on the waiver wire before Week 7? Last week, the waiver wire was really thin for fantasy owners that were looking to get somebody that could help them out right away. But this week's waiver wire might have a few names that you should be taking a look at. And that starts here at the running back position. Number 1, Latavius Murray from New Orleans, 46% owned, falling just under that 50% threshold that we use for this episode. And because of that, especially for Alvin Kamara owners, take a look at trying to add him this week. Even if you don't own Kamara, it might make sense to still try and grab him from the Kamara owner anyway, especially with we have some really good guys missing on the buys this week. Connor, Chubb, and Christian McCaffrey. So even if you have one of those guys and you're looking for a temporary fill-in, depending on the health of Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray could be a guy that you take into consideration. Now with Latavius Murray, Kamara again was banged up this week. So how is he going to be heading into next week? Something that we have to monitor with this situation. But with Latavius Murray, he had eight carries for 44 yards, 3 receptions for 35 yards. He averaged 7 yards per touch. He does have a tough matchup though. He has the Chicago Bears. So this would be a guy, again, if you own Kamara, definitely grab Latavius Murray just in case. And if you don't own Alvin Kamara, you can, number 1, block the Kamara owner, or number 2, grab him just for a little extra depth just in case. Who knows? Maybe if Kamara does end up needing to miss any time over the next couple of weeks, you can use Latavius Murray as a little bit of a trading piece as well. So keep an eye on the waiver situation. But the one guy that I definitely would be taking a look at this week is Adrian Peterson. Now, he just hits that 50% mark, so okay, maybe would have cheated a little bit and added him in here, but it's okay. We're going to throw him in on this episode because, as I mentioned last week several times, Bill Callahan said in his press conferences that he wanted to see Washington establish the run, and they did just that on Sunday against the Miami Dolphins. Adrian Peterson, 23 attempts, 118 yards. What we saw with Adrian Peterson last year was a lot of attempts, but he wasn't very efficient with them. 5.1 yards per carry this past week. So his efficiency was much better than what we saw last year. So a little bit of fountain of youth there for Adrian Peterson. Can he keep getting it moving forward? Who knows? But he's definitely going to be relied on in the game plan. He also had a couple of targets, but he was on the field a lot. I was really surprised that we did not see more Chris Thompson on Sunday because this game was really close the entire time. This could have easily been a situation where they kept Chris Thompson on the field a little bit more, tried to pull away from the Miami Dolphins. They did have to play a little bit of catch up at one point in time, but they ended up pulling out the win. So I was surprised we didn't see a little bit more Chris Thompson and less Adrian Peterson. But moving forward, we could see some more Adrian Peterson, or we could see anywhere from that 20 to 25 carries per game. If you're getting that with AP and he's averaging over 4 yards per carry, that's going to be more than enough to make him a potential running back 2, or at worst, a flex play every single week. So this is definitely someone that we're going to keep our eye on. If you are hurting at running back this week, then Adrian Peterson is definitely going to be a guy that I'm using a waiver priority on. Now, moving on, Mark Walton from Miami. This name may surprise some of you. Less than 1% owned in fantasy leagues right now. But on Sunday, he had 15 touches for 83 yards. He saw plenty of looks, whether it was in the passing game or in the running game. They really tried to get Mark Walton involved a little bit more this past Sunday. Kalen Ballage owners, I'm so sorry. He's not a thing. So if you're a truther of him, he's not going to be a thing anytime soon. Now, Kenyon Drake still had more touches, okay? But the thing that we need to remember about Miami moving forward is, what are they going to do with Kenyon Drake? His name has come up in some potential trade scenarios. Maybe Miami wants to figure out what they're going to have in Mark Walton. So we got to keep these things in mind moving forward. Should Kenyon Drake be seeing a lot more touches than Mark Walton? In my opinion, yes. Yes, he should. He should be used a lot more than what he has been this season. But it's 100% clear the Miami Dolphins have no interest in winning a game this year. They just have interest in picking first overall next season. So as of right now, Mark Walton is a speculative ad, a guy that you want to potentially grab if Kenyon Drake were to get hurt, if he were to get traded, if for any reason whatsoever they start to phase him out of the game plan and give more and more looks to Mark Walton. He could be a guy that maybe, depending on the matchup, you could get a flex play. But again, we're going to be missing some really good running backs this week. And with more buys to come, you're going to want to have the depth on your bench. All right, finally, our last waiver wire pickup for running backs is going to be Malcolm Brown, 25% owned. If you're a Todd Gurley owner, you're definitely going to be adding him this week. I would rather have Adrian Peterson over Malcolm Brown regardless. But if you can't get to Adrian Peterson, then Malcolm Brown is definitely a guy that you need to own if you don't already own him. And again, at only 25% owned, all the Todd Gurley owners out there don't have Malcolm Brown. So if you own Todd Gurley, grab him just in case. We don't know what's going to happen with Todd Gurley moving forward. We don't know how much time he could end up missing. And the one thing this past week, we got a lot of questions about Malcolm Brown, a lot of start-sit questions with his name. And I would say 90% of the questions I answered about Malcolm Brown, I said no to starting him. Jake and I were not high on Malcolm Brown this weekend for several reasons. We didn't love the matchup. We didn't think the matchup was going to be great. We also didn't know about Darrell Henderson. What was he going to do? Was he going to be used a little bit more? John Kelly was promoted from the practice squad as well. But Malcolm Brown still ended up being the running back 1. So I would assume that if Todd Gurley were to miss more time, that he would continue to be the running back 1. Now, next week, they get the Atlanta Falcons. They haven't given up a ton of points on the ground this year, but that's because they've been giving them basically all up through the air. So with the Atlanta Falcons this week coming up in week 7, Malcolm Brown still isn't going to be a guy that I'm likely going to say, yeah, start him in the place of Todd Gurley. Adrian Peterson would be my number 1 target, even if I'm a Todd Gurley owner. But then after that, Todd Gurley owners, you definitely need to secure Malcolm Brown this week just to have that insurance to at least have someone to put into your lineup if you end up missing Todd Gurley again moving forward. All right, now we're moving on to wide receivers. Only 3 wide receivers that I'm listing this week that I'm really targeting on my waiver wire. Auden Tate's going to be number 1, only 18% owned. We'll talk about him in a minute. But the names that you might not see on here that you're going to have questions about come from the Seattle Seahawks. Now, Jerron Brown did have a good game this weekend with 2 touchdowns. But that volume that Will Dissly's been taking, that is going to be brought over to probably some new names that haven't seen some of that volume yet this year. But it's still going to be Tyler Lockett. It's still going to be DK Metcalf. Both of those guys over 50% owned, so they're not going to be included here, obviously. But it could be Jerron Brown one week. It could end up being David Moore another week. David Moore, I like him. He's got a lot of big playability. So I think these guys could go back and forth on a weekly basis. That's why I'm not really running out to the waiver wire to grab either of those guys, because I don't see a ton of volume. I'm not seeing 2 touchdowns every single week for either of them. But moving forward, I'm not going to see it. I don't think either of them see a ton of volume either. And who knows, once Rashad Penny is much healthier, not dealing with the issues that he's had lingering for the last few weeks, and he's on the field more often, That could be a guy that could benefit a little bit from this as well. So only 3 guys that I'm really targeting, really keeping an eye on this week. We'll start with Darius Slayton. My boy Darius Slayton, I really like him. He was a guy when I did a Deep Sleepers episode this offseason. He was a guy that I included, and I said keep an eye on him because he's going to have that big play potential. He's the one guy on the New York Giants that can really stretch the field. Golden Tate is back. Sterling Shepard isn't really a guy that's going to stretch the field, but when he gets healthy and back on the field and he's not dealing with the concussion anymore, when Evan Ingram gets back on the field, Saquon Barkley gets back on the field, that's a lot of weapons. Daniel Jones hasn't played that bad. He's had some flashes. He's looked a lot better than what a lot of people anticipated. But Darius Slayton could be that big play guy. He could be the guy that, gets you another 5 touchdowns the rest of the season. A guy that's going to have some big plays. A guy that in really good matchups you could stick out there and you could look for some of that big plays from, especially in like a standard league. So Darius Slayton only 4% owned right now. This last game, he did have 8 targets, so 8 targets is a good solid number for him. Again, no Sterling Shepard or Evan Ingram or Saquon Barkley, though, so I'm not expecting that many each game. But he has had at least 5 targets in 3 of the 4 games that he's played in this season. So again, he's definitely going to be a boomer bust guy moving forward, but he's definitely a guy that we could see return with some big play potential. So that's why we need to be keeping an eye on his name. Now, Jacoby Myers from New England, only 1% owned. He's another guy that I'm keeping a look at, basically because we're monitoring the health of Josh Gordon. Now, Josh Gordon had to leave Thursday Night Football with an injury a little bit early. We know that Julian Edelman is also banged up. They're going to be playing the Jets on Monday Night Football, so they're going to get a little bit of extra time here to get healthy between the Thursday to the Monday night matchup. He was 4 for 4 this past week, though. 4 targets, 4 receptions, 54 yards against the Giants. A guy that a lot of people were taking a look at in the preseason. He really showed out in the preseason, looked good, and a lot of people thought that he was going to make the roster. Now, when Josh Gordon ended up coming back, then Antonio Brown was there, then Antonio Brown was gone. So Jacoby Myers is going to get an opportunity here, especially if Josh Gordon is limited in any way next week. If he's limited moving forward, if he has to miss any time, then Myers is definitely going to be a guy, especially considering the Patriots are scrapping the tight end position this year and not nearly focusing on it as much in the past. And even if Josh Gordon gets back, we could see Jacoby Myers in some 3 wide receiver sets as well, with Julian Edelman being on the slot, Gordon on the outside, Myers on the other outside as well. And again, because we're not really focusing on the tight end position there like we have in previous years, Myers could see a little bit more target. So another guy to keep your eye on, especially in deeper leagues. All right, Auden Tate at 18% owned. I already mentioned the name. I said we'd talk about him in a minute. Well, here we go. Auden Tate is one of, if not my top waiver priority ad this week. This is a guy that you need to go out and get, especially if you're hurting at wide receiver. Over the last 4 games, Auden Tate has 36 targets. The dude is averaging darn near 10 targets per game over the last 4 games. We don't know when Ross is going to be back. Obviously, AJ Green could be lurking and coming back sometime soon, but there's also been a lot of trade talk as well. Auden Tate is seeing more than enough volume right now and has more than enough potential with that volume to be a weekly flex play for you. So I am using a top waiver priority on him this week if I need to. Again, only 18% owned, and he's been playing well over the last 4 weeks. He's seen a lot of targets over the last 4 weeks, and people are still refusing to add him. Definitely be adding him moving forward. 5 catches for 91 yards against the Ravens last week. Definitely a guy that I'm keeping an eye on. And outside of Adrian Peterson, who I'm also considering a top waiver priority this week, Auden Tate is right there with him as well. Definitely keep an eye on him. Definitely grab him if he is still available. Moving on to the tight end position, there's one name at the bottom of the screen there that's lurking that we're going to talk about in just a moment. But let's talk about Darren Fells and Jordan Atkins to begin with out of Houston. Now, if you watched my shows last week, you know that I was high on potentially streaming either of these guys. Now, my choice last week was Atkins and it ended up being Fells, so I unfortunately didn't call that one correctly. But both of these guys are definitely ones to be taking a look at. As I mentioned in those shows, heading into week 6, Fells and Atkins combined for numbers that would have made them the tight end 3 and half PPR formats. So if you put them together, they're a terrific tight end. The problem is trying to figure out which one is going to be the better tight end on a weekly basis. This past week, Darren Fells and Jordan Atkins combined for 9 catches, 108 yards, and 1 touchdown against the Chiefs. Now, Fells holds the touchdown upside. He seems to be the one that's targeted a little bit more in the end zone. Atkins had been the guy recently that had a little bit more volume with him. So moving forward, probably going to switch it. That's why I have Fells' names listed first there, because Fells will probably be the guy that I'm looking at first to begin with. But Deshaun Watson is consistently targeting both of these guys week in and week out, which is crazy because they have so many weapons there. But these two continue to be guys that are returning some decent fantasy value if you pick the correct one. But if at any point in time, either one of these guys go down, the other one becomes an automatic tight end for me, tight end 1, every single week. So definitely continue to monitor that situation and potentially grab either one of them this week if you need help at tight end. He was on the bye last week, but Dawson Knox at only 3% owned still is another guy to continue to consider because he's been becoming another reliable weapon for Josh Allen in that offense. I was a little bit worried about the tight end position with Josh Allen because Josh Allen continues to have some intermediate accuracy issues. However, Knox is being targeted right now and has looked decent over the last couple of weeks. So again, another streaming option if you need one. But again, talking about some of these other guys, Ricky Seals-Jones, another one that's been interesting. He's been a roller coaster since coming to Cleveland, but I've talked about before. I love Ricky Seals-Jones. I think he's definitely an athletic receiving tight end that can give you a lot of value. He's a former wide receiver from Texas A&M, so we know he has what it takes to play that position as a receiving tight end. So we'll continue to monitor and see what happens moving forward. Again, I really like Ricky Seals-Jones. I'm rooting for the guy. I would love to see him become fantasy viable week in and week out. 3 for 47 and 1 touchdown. He does have 2 touchdowns over his last 3 games. And with how inconsistent that offense has been outside of Nick Chubb, Ricky Seals-Jones really could become that guy. He could become a guy that is a little bit more of a consistent option for Baker Mayfield. If Baker Mayfield is looking to get rid of the ball a little bit more quicker, Ricky Seals-Jones is a guy that really could start to help in that area. So another guy that might be an interesting stash for you prior to week 7. And Ricky Seals-Jones, honestly, is probably not going to cost you a waiver priority. You could either, if you have a low-end one, you could use it, or you could let waivers go through and potentially grab him. Because if he's not available, then you could grab Knox. Fells and Atkins are both going to be very reliable. So if you're a Disley owner, a lot of these guys. But the main guy, Hunter Henry, a lot of people gave up on him. He was definitely a guy that we pleaded for you to pick prior to the season starting in your drafts. We were all devastated, including myself, when he went down with his injury. But he's back already. And on Sunday Night Football, he came back with a vengeance. 8 receptions, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, 48% owned right now. If he was dropped in your league, grab him right away. Absolutely grab him. Even if you have another tight end already, grab Hunter Henry. And then at that point, either you're going to play Hunter Henry moving forward because he's going to automatically move to a top 5 option for me moving forward. I'm just going to be clear with you right now. Week in and week out, Hunter Henry is going to be a guy that's going to be consistently a top 5 tight end for me every single week. So with that being said, grab him right now. Don't wait. If he's available in your league, put in a waiver priority. I'll take this guy over Auden Tate. If I'm really thin at running back, I guess I'll take Adrian Peterson first. But Hunter Henry, again, another guy I'm confirming as a top waiver priority for you this week, especially if you need help at tight end. He should be your number 1 target. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it, the Waiver Wire Show for Week 7. Go out there and put in your waiver claims, get your roster ready to roll, make some improvements, reinforce it, add some depth. Whatever you need to do. If you have a losing record right now, let's get you back on track. Let's get you back to 500, over that, and into the playoffs. If you're over 500 right now, 100%, let's keep moving forward. Let's keep grinding. Let's get you into the playoffs as well. Whatever your record is, there is still plenty of time left in the season. So continue to work on your roster on a daily basis. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of the Fantasy Headliners. If you have not joined Headliner Nation yet by hitting that subscribe button, do it for me now and turn on the bell notification. So anytime we go live for our Saturday night shows or anytime we drop content, which is every single day of the week, you're going to get a notification on that right away. Also hit that like button on the video if you appreciate and like the content. And of course, leave any comments below that you might have about players that you should be targeting this week. Headliner Nation, thanks so much for another great show. I'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one.